All right, good morning and welcome to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Yorai today to talk about awesome, fun game dev news and other stuff and chat with everybody live. So how are you doing out there, everybody? If you're here with me live, please hit the thumbs up button and say hello in chat to get the conversation started. And how are you doing today, Yorai?
I'm doing pretty well. Woke up recently and I started reading about this nice Unity article.
Oh, is that
It's fun.
the Addressables one that you just sent me?
Yeah,
Or
so it's really nice that they're starting to pick up their blog posts about actual development topics instead of news about their services. I mean, I guess Addressable is a service, but it's something that's actually practical and works without the Unity dashboard explicitly. So for those who don't know about Addressables, it's something pretty big that's worth discussing. Do you want to just hop into it right away, or?
Yeah, let's hold on 1 second and then we'll do it. I think it's going to be a big conversation. I popped it up there, but we probably should just chat with everybody for just a minute and everything before we dive into it, because Addressables is a pretty big one. It's a pretty interesting looking article though, so I'm going to link that in chat and in the description for everybody. I forgot the other thing I was just going to say. Oh, I'm totally losing my train of thought here. Oh, hold on. Oh, good. Andrew's on his way in too.
Yeah.
Andrew says I should show up. Give me some coffee. All right. So, you know what? Let's just dive into the Addressables thing. Let's start talking about it a little bit, because I think it's an interesting enough topic that we can probably start with that, and then I'll remember the other stuff that I wanted to talk about and share and all that. So they just released this article on Addressables, and are you using Addressables in your your projects that you're working on? I know Terraria is not in Unity, but the other stuff when you play around or when you build side projects or whatever stuff you may or may not be doing, do you use Addressables right now?
Yes, I use Addressables specifically in things that I know are projects with dynamic content. So just to explain a bit on why I just said dynamic content, Unity traditionally has been scene-based resource management, where every time you load an asset, all its dependencies are loaded immediately. And those dependencies would have their own dependencies, and those would be loaded immediately as well. So by just loading a scene, all the assets associated with a scene get loaded together. But if you have a game, like an open world game, where the player can access any item at any time, think Breath of the Wild, where you can have any ammo from all over the world and any weapon, and carry around a box from one side of the continent to the other, those types of workflows fall apart because you can't have the entire world loaded in memory at the same time. So by giving the developer more control on what they load and when they load it, you can kind of optimize things out. So you have weak references to assets instead of strong references. The strong references being loaded immediately with all their dependencies, and the weak ones being, I am pointing to that asset, don't load it just yet. And doing it that way, you can kind of say, okay, I need to load this now. This, I just need to know it exists. I don't need it loaded in memory. And Addressables are really good for that, specifically in games where you have a bunch of vanity options. In Terraria, there are so many visible accessories and armors and vanity equipment that's if we had all of them loaded in memory at the same time, we'd be running out of memory, because Terraria is a 32-bit application, and by the time we reach 4 gigabytes of memory, the game crashes. So we never exceed that amount. So when you work with 3D models for that kind of vanity, it goes even beyond that. And I love vanity in games, so I'm trying to keep it as tight on memory as possible, but give as many options as possible. So when I made a system for character creation with all the equipable stuff, I used addressables for it. And then I started using it for abilities that you can load into the character, because animations can be pretty expensive assets as well if they are long or have a lot of keyframes. So with Unity's animator, you can't actually dynamically load in animations, quote unquote. There are override animator controllers you can use, but you can't easily blend between two of them. But there is the playable graph system. This one lets you load in any animation you want dynamically into any character, so you can kind of install states with animations onto a character at runtime and say, now I have this sword slash ability with this red version of particles, and then I have another sword slash ability with blue versions of particles, and I don't need all of them loaded in memory at once. So I can use all my asset packs that I'm buying way too often from We Make the Game, etc., and just cram them into a character and dynamically load only what I need for gameplay. The one caveat with addressables is that it is a lot of code to start managing when you load and unload your assets, but it's extremely fun and useful.
Yeah, it takes a little while to get set up and running, but I feel like once you're doing it and once you start using it, it gets really easy to just start using it pretty much everywhere that it makes sense. And I think you largely covered some of the big stuff. Are there some things that you would recommend people don't use addressables for? Is there anything? Go ahead.
So the main gist of addressables is you get the control, but you also get the responsibility, because once you load an asset, you need to control when to unload it. And that responsibility can be mismanaged, especially if people don't know about addressables and you're like the only one in the project who is using it. The others are going to like, oh yeah, I load it like that, and then they just instantiate it, and then they never bother to like insert an unload point. So if your game is just level based and that level has everything it needs, you don't need to worry about addressables. Likewise, if your game is light on assets, like we're talking low poly, not that much content, don't worry about addressables. The entire point of addressables is managing when you have a lot of asset dependencies and they're not small assets. So Unity is really good about handling dependencies for you for the most part.
Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Going good. I came in and I immediately started thinking about that new not Harry Potter game, the not Harry Potter game that just came out, because I was thinking, oh, good call out. I forget that from time to time. It's all the way up there. It's really hard to see when I'm not looking up, you know.
You still sound okay when it's far away, though.
Oh, excellent. That's good to know.
Not great, but okay. Now you sound great.
Excellent. Perfect. That's how I prefer. I've been playing that Harry Potter game, and I was paying attention to how they load things between scenes. And I imagine, you know, this, I've never played with addressables, but of course, with my own content, having a lot of vanity options available, it's something that perhaps I should look into and get up to speed on.
It's not a light amount of work. So just to explain a bit how addressables work, you get like a line of code that says load the asset, a line of code that says unload the asset, and between them, you don't really need anything. But the problem is, for the most part, you do need to call the unload the asset portion. So it adds 2 lines of code per thing you want to spawn with manual memory management, which can kind of go off the rails if you are spawning a lot of things from a lot of scripts. You can generalize it so it's easier, like making a good wrapper script that kind of understands when you want to unload things. It's variable. So I'd be careful with it, especially if you're new. But if you read a lot about it, it becomes like second nature. And like, what is 2 more lines of code outside of instantiate and destroy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like 2 lines of code doesn't sound daunting to me, but at the same time, once you add 2 lines of code and then you multiply that by a bunch of different characters, a bunch of different objects, a bunch of different things that can be included, and then you start forgetting where you put that code, and then, oh wait, there's an edge case where something gets removed, but I didn't run the unsubscribe, but the other bit of code, the ending code, suddenly it can become
one of the biggest trip mines on this is you load an asset, you create something else and let it use the asset, and then your thing that spawned the asset unloads and unloads the asset with itself. So the thing that's already spawned is still pointing to that asset, but it didn't say, hey, I'm also using it, so please don't unload until I'm done using it as well. And then you enter like an undefined situation.
Yeah, I make that similar mistake often when referencing lists and other things, and ensuring that I'm not I'm referencing the list instead of copying the list, and then I'll accidentally delete something, and then like, wait, where'd it go? Went away. It shouldn't have gone away, but yeah.
As soon as you delete something from that reference list, it's still gone. So it gets destroyed. I want to add Tor real quick. He just showed up. So everybody who's used Odin Inspector or the Validator, Tor is a big part of that team and here with us live now. So if you happen to have any questions about Odin stuff, now is probably the perfect episode to ask them to. So welcome, Tor. Can you hear us? Or can we hear you?
Curious.
Yeah.
Maybe we can't hear Tor. I'll just leave Tor on until we can hear him. Eventually he'll show up. and we'll hear him. So we've got a couple questions popping up in chat already. Oh, there was one thing I forgot to share already that I need to pop up, which is the boot camp that I've got kicking off tomorrow. If you're interested in game development stuff, there's a link down below, but it's starting. I'm losing my voice now. It's perfect. It's starting tomorrow. We'll be kicking it off the course, kind of boot camp and / course. We'll be talking about or learning all the game development stuff. I cannot talk this morning. So anyway, it'll be fun. It's interesting. There's lots of info up on the page. You can go check it out. Getting the meetup set up. We'll have our first Q&A on Wednesday, and we'll have the first office hours actually tomorrow at noon Pacific. So in like 27 hours from now, or right around there. I'm working on getting that set up as we do all of this and as I lose my voice. So feel free to go check that out, and I will stop talking about it now. Anyway, do we have Tor back? Is there I can't pop that down tiny. No, not yet. All right, let's just minimize that. There's the link's down in the description. So Andrew, what's new with you? What's been going on?
Oh, I've been in refactoring mode these days. It's been very exciting though. So when you're in a pool, this is a great analogy. You're in a pool and you can't swim, but you're getting closer to the deep end, and then you get to the point where your toes are touching the bottom, and you're like, oh wait, no. If I keep bobbing my head up, I can breathe still. That's where I am with my coding right now in my refactoring. I've been doing a lot of generics.
Oh, don't over generic. One of the biggest problems I've run into in the past, and I've seen other people do, is like they learn about generics and they go overboard, and then they make it really, really difficult for themselves to use things. And they've got a generic that they created that has like 2 things that ever get used for it, and they're used totally different. And then the code becomes a giant nightmare. So just watch out for it. Generics are super awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like I love them, and I think everybody should know about them and be using them. But watch out for accidentally overdoing it, because that's exactly what I did when I first learned about generics. I was like, I can just do this everywhere. Now I don't have to have types for anything. And,
no, I'm not. I hope I'm not going overboard. I hope I'm not. But it's for my dictionaries. And speaking of Odin, serializing things that can't be serialized. The goal was to have, this easily accessible, very flexible list of anything, game module objects, so stats and item objects and other things that come with game modules, but also ints and floats and strings and bools and then things like textures and sprites, other things that might come in handy. So basically, hey, you've got this dictionary thing here. You can use it. You can load it up with all sorts of different things. So whatever you want to do in your game, and if you're using the game modules, you can use this and just use it however you want, because I don't, everyone's going to have a different game. I'm not going to control that. So the original version works fine. People use it. They talk about how they like to use it. And every once in a while up in Discord, someone's like, oh, I'll just use the dictionaries for that. It works perfectly, because it is just a flexible repository of information. The problem was that the each key value just had basically a whole set of different things on it, a float, a string, even if you didn't use it. And so I wanted to get
Nice.
rid of that because
Great.
every time I saw my serialized files, the dictionaries were just like a huge chunk of data, even if you weren't using them. And so I was like, well, if I make it so that each thing is just one object that only gets used if you're using it and only has data if you're using that data, then it should be more clean in the end. So I went down that path of genericizing it. Is that the word? Genericizing? I think that's the official word.
I mean, you could say generalize, but it's not the same.
So I think it's working now.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
got Tor now.
Excellent. Fantastic.
Hello,
I don't know
Tor.
why. I switched to Chrome and then it worked. So I don't know what was up with that.
I use
Oh, yeah, I
Chrome
think
for
it's just
this as well.
Restream doesn't like other browsers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Great to be on here. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, welcome, Tor, and thanks for coming. I'm sure there are probably going to be a couple questions specifically for you in chat just about Odin stuff. So if, like I said, if you're interested, you're using Odin or you've never used Odin and you're kind of curious about it, feel free to ask questions. Now is probably one of the best opportunities to do that. So anything new?
About Odin.
Is there anything new going on over there?
Oh yeah, lots. Some stuff that I probably shouldn't be talking about publicly yet.
Anything
And
you
we're
can
working on
talk
a lot
about?
of we're working on a lot of really cool stuff. It's,
tell.
I think it's really going to be huge, but we're not ready to super talk about all of it quite yet, because some of it is like some larger behind the scenes tech things we're working on that will, I think, move beyond just Odin in the future.
Oh, okay.
Odin. Does that mean beyond both Odin serializer and validator, or?
Yeah. It's it means that it's it will allow us to do a bunch of different things in the long term. So it's going to be super cool, I think. But in terms of just Odin itself, let's see, what are we working on right now? So we're still improving the validator. Obviously, we're working on a bunch of different things that are just like you might call it like spring cleaning updates and just fine tuning things. We're adding icons to everything. We recently added like a sign distance field icon rendering feature, so that now you can have crisp icons at any resolution without having to bake MIP maps or anything, and so on. And now we're adding those to all the attributes. You can have icons, in line with the labels and with the buttons and all those things, and add them in the tab group tabs, and little feature quality of life features like that. We're working obviously on the editor, which is the drag and drop WYSIWYG kind of. Well, not really WYSIWYG, but it's like where you can drag and drop things around and apply attributes to them, like a visual layouting editor in the editor itself. So you can, create your editors without ever having to write any code. And also, I see somebody asking, what is Odin? And well, yeah, you're looking at sort of what it does right now, but basically it's primarily an inspector tool that lets you very easily and quickly generate like whatever inspectors you want, just using a few attributes. And then it's also super extendable, so you can sort of hook into that and extend it in your own ways and utilize the full power of it in so many different kinds of cases. And like making custom editor windows, and I know some people have adapted it to like look at native data and so on, so it's quite extendable in that sense. And then there's also a serializer that is bundled along with it, so you can save any. Sorry, I'm a little fuzzy. I'm not quite.
You're doing great.
The serializer basically lets you work with any data types that Unity might not. It used to be more that ground that we covered compared to Unity. Unity has recently gotten a bit of polymorphism with serialized reference, right? They still don't do dictionaries, and they don't do like polymorphism. You can't have an interface thing with serialized reference and then put like a component implementing that interface into it. They don't do like polymorphic Unity object references, except if it's like the base field is a Unity object and so on. So there's still some ground that we cover in terms of integrating more data types into the inspector and rendering them nicely.
Yeah, like the dictionary one, I think is. I like that's the example because that's the one that everybody runs into first. They're like, wait,
Yeah,
why is it null? It's empty every time.
Everybody always wants the dictionaries. Yeah, no, yeah, we put a lot of work into making those work well in the Specter as well. So recently, we sometimes get weird requests like, can you make them like, why can't I drag and drop the order around? And then we have to explain that sadly that's not how dictionaries work. I wish we could, but ordering doesn't make any sense in a dictionary.
Well, it makes sense in an authoring perspective for the user, but nothing
Yeah,
else.
yeah. That's the case where, honestly, I think a lot of times when people want to use a dictionary, what they really should be doing is they should be making a list of like keys and values, like a list of a struct that has a key and a value. And then you can just draw that like a dictionary. And we have ways of doing that. And then you can do whatever you want with that, right? You can do add some validation logic using, for example, Odin Validator to double check that you're not adding the same key several times or whatever. Then you can order it however you want. And then at runtime, you can turn that into a dictionary. I think that's probably a better way of doing it generally.
There are people
are messy in terms of the data. Also, when you get into prefab modifications and so on, that's the thing we're working on. Better prefab support for Odin serialized data now. I think we're not announcing that it will work, but it will probably finally work again with nested prefabs. So it's been a while since nested prefabs released. It's not really worked because prefab modifications are tricky, but I think we've got it now. I think. I don't want to promise, but I'm hopeful.
There's one thing I wanted to say about Odin, which is for many people who try to work with Unity without installing an IDE and trying to edit the code in standard text editor, it feels like a butter knife, and then you get the IDE and it's like a revving chainsaw. Odin feels like that, but for the Unity inspector, because even by just installing it, the entire editor gets beefed up with like better list views, etc. And all the improvements over missing aspects in Unity, like when you make a serialized reference list, you can't actually add anything to the list by default in Unity, and Odin gives you the buttons to find what you want and add them in. It's so fantastic and it saves a lot of time. So thank you for making it.
Thank you for that comment. That's what we made it for. That's,
completely agree. Now, there's a question here about Odin with netcode for game objects. I don't know if you know the answer to this one, Tor. Says, does Odin have a good way to use it with netcode for game objects? They're currently making custom inspectors for any network behavior they want to use Odin attributes on.
Right. I'm assuming that means that they're making their own custom editor and then deriving it from Odin editor. And this is something that happens with almost every networking library out there in Odin. So the thing is, Odin typically doesn't override anything that already has a custom editor defined. Like we check against that and then we decide not to do it. We could, but by default we don't. So in every networking behavior, they have like some network view thing or network behavior, and it's got some extra inspector bits, and they always have a custom editor for that. Yeah. And so Odin defaults to not being active on them. And it should be quite simple to sort of hack it in or patch it in or just define a custom editor again. I would, like, the easiest way of doing it probably is like that requires no hacking whatsoever, is just making your own base Odin network behavior, if you will. And then you can make one editor that targets that, and then you can just implement Odin editor there. So instead of deriving from editor, you just derive from Odin editor. And then when you call all the base functions, it won't be the default Unity inspector that draws, it'll be Odin instead. So that's probably the easiest way of doing that. Then it'll just work. And then whenever you make a network behavior component that you would like Odin to draw, you just derive it from Odin network behavior, some abstract behavior class you make that's empty. The only point is telling the custom editor to render that. You could also just probably make an override editor for like the network behavior itself that risks messing with what it's doing already. Like that's why you have to make a custom editor. That's why Odin doesn't override it, because we might break something. What if it needs to show some network ID or whatever, right? They always have some custom things and
Odin some drop downs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always stuff like that. There is a question that I'm almost positive the answer is no to. Does Odin work with Unreal?
No, it doesn't. At least not right now. It's something we've talked about maybe exploring at some point, and I'm not saying it's definitely not going to happen, but if it does happen, it's a little ways into the future still.
It seems like a whole separate product
Yeah, I mean, it's a different language and a different environment. It's C++, and Unreal doesn't really have reflection in the same way C# does. They do have they have a reflection system, but it only works for the things you sort of add it for. They have like their U object, U property, U whatever things, like the macros you put on various things, and they have the preprocessor thing that goes through and scans and finds all the metadata things, and then they have their reflection for the Unreal serializable things that they can then show in the inspector. So we could use that. We have looked into it, the fact that there is a reflection system even, because typically Odin wouldn't work in C++ at all.
But they've kind of made it possible at least. So
yeah, because you need something like that in a game engine, basically. At least a properly generic game engine like Unreal that's broad. You need like a kind of property reflection data system. It's a reference counting and all their serialization and so on. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say it's a huge detriment if you don't have that in a game engine.
Yeah, you kind of need something like that.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a question that popped up earlier. I don't have a clue what the right answer is, and I don't know if anybody here does either, but I figure we'll have fun with it. It says, how should I appropriate my unfinished game to somebody who wants to see it as a presentation? Should I put a short? I think they're trying to. They want to show somebody their unfinished game. Should they do a short clip or blueprints with watermarks, or just link them on their website? So I guess if they want to give, where was the rest of that question? Let me scroll up. I lost my train of thought on this question. I'm terrible at this. Yeah, so if you are going to approach somebody with your unfinished game that wants to see, so they have somebody who wants to see a presentation of their game. It's not finished. How would you kind of present that to somebody? I guess is really the question. So you got a game that's kind of a work in progress. You want to show it off to somebody, maybe somebody who's interested in investing or working on it or whatever. What would your approach be to kind of present that? I mean, Andrew, you've kind of been doing this on your game, right? Like you show your game off constantly in the unfinished state. If somebody like wants an actual presentation of it, they'll like say like you're going to show it to somebody who's like, hey, can you just like give me a demo of your game? How would you kind of structure that? What would you do?
I would probably do a vertical slice, try to find the section of the game that shows off the main core things that make the game itself, and try to show off a 5-minute segment of here's a playable thing. If it's an in-person thing, then a playable thing. If it's not in person, then a video showcasing that. And I would lead with the most impressive graphics and game mechanics that I could is what I'd probably try to do.
So you wouldn't start like this is the beginning, like here you create your character, here you do your thing. You would just go straight to like the cool shots, or
I think if character creation is something I want to get through to somebody, I would probably do a very quick like time lapse of character creation and then show the gameplay. Character creation's fun. I think it's a big ad for a lot of people. I love doing it. I know with the Harry Potter game, I spent a good 30 minutes or 20 minutes customizing my character.
Yep.
But it's not the game, right? That's not the game. That is a mini game, if you'd like. And so it's something that I would showcase, because for people who like that, especially if it's a production company where every single one of their game has customizable characters, then you probably want to show that your game you're pitching to them also has customizable characters. But I would make it very quick. And try and make the demonstration, assuming it's an elevator pitch style, you only have a few minutes, make it exciting, make sure there's sound effects, make sure there's music, make sure there's particle effects, etc.
I know your eyes got thoughts on this. Probably very
I got
different.
a lot of thoughts about what Andrew just said. Specifically, I just want to call out first, character creation can take more than 5 hours, depending. And in MMOs in particular, that's also the end game. So it's not just a mini game, it's a main portion. But also, we have Jason's story in the comments that's already giving the excellent answer of what would you want to see if somebody explains a game to you. In my own opinion, to answer that person's question regarding how to appropriate the unfinished game for a presentation, it depends on what you want to show. If you're doing it for social media, you only want to show your best. Don't put anything less than the best on the plate. This comes from a restaurant kind of analogy. But if there's something that's unappetizing, something that people wouldn't want to see, don't put it up. And you can do the same with your presentation. There is a cost to reward ratio where appropriating a game can mean go in and modify it a bit so it is a better experience, so you can show it better. Making a vertical slice is something that you sometimes can't do, because if it was a prototype, it is a prototype. It doesn't have anything visual, so to speak. But if you do want to show it, show the best parts of that prototype. So find the shortest segments that shows the best, the core, the crux of what you think is worth sharing with somebody. Do only that, do it the best you can, and then share it cleanly. The person asks about watermarks and the like. You don't need any of that unless you're trying to brand yourself. A watermark or something that says, this is me, I made this is what it is. You can follow it with this keyword. This is only good for branding. If you're showing it to a specific person that already knows you, you don't need any of that.
I think that's all good advice. Tor, I don't know if you got anything on this. I got nothing. So
it's been a long time since I was actually making games. These days, I'm just a tools guy, really.
Well, let's go to a tools question.
We did have a game that we wanted to publish before we came out with Odin. I have shown it on stream, I think, once. Maybe even that was that with you, Jason? I think called Lotus Star, where you draw out these patterns and so on. Or was
I think so. Yeah. It's so funny. I feel like every tool developer had a game that they wanted to make, and then they made tools for that game, and they realized that the tool building was more fun and more interesting.
It's an old story. Even Unity themselves, right? But yeah, what we did, like we had a bunch of publishers that we were trying to get a deal with, and we just watermarked builds in the sense that this build was sent to this publisher more. We didn't watermark it for ourselves as much as, like, if it does leak, at least who might have leaked it or whatever. That was the idea behind that. And then we just sent it out to them, and it was a demo, and a PDF, like, this is what the game is about. Here's some videos of the gameplay, and then just the whole game, really. But that's because it was such a complicated game that with the puzzles that we had to intro them, through the beginning of the game to even teach them how the puzzle mechanic worked. It's like Jonathan Blow couldn't have started The Witness in the middle of the game if you had some demo where you have to do the crazy things. Like, people just go like, "What is this game? I don't know anything."
I think that makes sense. It does depend a lot on the specific game type, if they can kind of understand it. Because if you show them something they can't understand at all, they're probably not going to be very engaged or interested. You kind of want to build that up. And like I said, I never part of my job. There was always a department doing that kind of stuff. So I've never had to deal with that. Luckily, I don't feel like it's something I'm good at. There is a question specifically for you though, Tor, and it's one I don't know the answer to. Does Odin use the new UI stuff? Does it work with the new UI system? How does that? Can you talk a little bit about that, about the new UI system? I think there's probably some confusion here.
Sure, I can talk about the new UI system first. So in Unity, the UI system they used to have, like way back in the day, and what the editor until recently still was running on, was something called imGUI, which is both the name of a pattern and the name of Unity's specific version of that imGUI pattern. So they've been trying to switch away from this imGUI, which is immediate mode GUI, where like you draw something and then it happens right away. There's no like retained state of like a specification of this is how the UI is supposed to be. Now they switched to UI toolkit, also one's known as UI elements, where it's like you define a set of elements and it's more like an HTML DOM, like where you have this whole set of things and their styles, and it's like a big retained sort of state system of objects and children that hierarchically define exactly what's supposed to be drawn. So. And Odin is still written in imGUI. It doesn't use the new UI system yet. It doesn't actually support it either. I mean, it supports being drawn within it, but it doesn't support drawing it yet. But we have some, like, we've gotten really far with that. We have some really good working prototypes of drawing like UI toolkit UI within imGUI, so that we can have like a gradual transition and have full support for implementing in both imGUI and UI toolkit. which is some tech sorcery that I wasn't particularly involved in creating, but I'm very impressed with Bjarke on our team who did it. It's pretty cool the way he managed to get that all working together. So no, Odin, in short, doesn't use the new UI system yet, but it will support it soon, and it will gradually move to using it more and more.
As you're working on it, are you actually seeing improvements already in terms of performance, or does it feel about the same right now?
I don't really know yet. We just have cool tech demos of all the things working. I would suspect, and this is just a theory, I don't know, that the performance improvements aren't going to be that significant compared to what was before, because the rendering isn't really the most expensive part of the UI. It's typically the serialization of the component that would make your editor lag, because Unity still has this thing where they serialize anything you're looking at every single frame. Sometimes several times per frame, which is hard to get around. But
I've been finding it really cumbersome when you're dealing with large assets and you're trying to edit like one thing and having a validation method, and then suddenly the entire thing crawls to a halt when you're like moving a slider.
Yeah, exactly. It's tricky with like some massive prefab that has like 5 megabytes of data in it or something. Like, I can only recommend for those cases is don't put the data where you're viewing it. Put it in some separate storage object that you never look at, and then you can avoid serializing it every time. It has to be viewed. Then you can just inspect it instead. Because with Odin, like we have, you can have a list with 1 million elements in it, and it'll run fine as long as you don't have to serialize it all the time.
That's interesting. I run into laggy editors all the time. Some of my tools I include with my characters are fairly heavy in the inspector, and that I assume that's probably why. I don't know the tech. I'm not up on all that, so I don't really know. But it would explain it, because there's a lot of stuff being drawn and saved and whatnot.
Yeah, it depends from editor to editor, but it could be.
Yeah, to be fair, Andrew, you're working on an asset that's literally piles of information, collections of stats, characters, etc. So it's like having all your content inside an inspector window means all your content gets serialized and deserialized every frame in that inspector window. So
yeah.
Actually, with an inspector window, I think there is an exception, because the window doesn't get serialized unless you make it. It typically only gets serialized when they do the domain like reloads. So a window is actually a pretty good way of looking at a lot of data without having that serialization penalty.
And Jason Story mentioned the possibility of using pages.
That is one of the ways Odin gets Odin can't draw 1 million elements at once and make it not lag. What we can do is show you part of the list, and then you can go to where you want. That's pagination is how Odin does it. Yeah.
And is that's not something you've put in yet, Andrew? Or I thought you have pages for some things, don't you?
I know what pagination is when it comes to like websites and stuff, but I'm not sure I fully understand what that would entail. Beyond like I don't have lists of millions of things. I've got lists of, in some cases, a few hundred things that are all different types of things, and then nested lists and all this other stuff. But generally, my editors get laggy when I'm drawing a large number of lists. And by large, I mean, we're talking about 100, 200 things, but they're all like doing something. And I might be abusing the set dirty call as well. I might be abusing that from time to time.
It sounds like it's the serialization that's making your editor lag. Honestly.
That is my guess. Because when I collapse these lists, then it doesn't lag. So it's literally, if I have too many things at once, it's lag. If I don't, then it's not. So and then some of my users have extra laggy problems I can't replicate, which is extra annoying, because one guy said it actually starts when I install Gaia, and then when I bring Gaia out, it doesn't lag anymore. I'm like, why would Gaia have any impact on my inspector script? I have no idea. But apparently for that user, he installs Gaia and my stuff gets laggy. He removes Gaia and my stuff is not laggy. So who knows?
I already have some theories just from describing that, but that's technical. No need to get into that.
Yeah. It's edge case probably is my guess, but who knows?
All right, you guys ready to move on to another question?
Yeah, sure.
Should we do the one that you were just talking about, Uri, or do you want to talk about shaders?
Whichever one you feel like.
Let's start with the shaders. I think this is a good one. This one that a lot of people are going to be curious about. So as they said, making visually unique games relies on custom shaders. How would you approach learning shaders? You got some good resources, references, ideas, and talk briefly just about what the hell a shader is and the material. People who have no idea, like, don't know the difference.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with what is a shader, because that's the easiest thing. Your computer runs on code. It has pixels. Pixels have colors. That's just data. That's numbers. Some code says these numbers go here. The hardware says I'm drawing color. Done. Now, the shader is just the code that says draw this color here. There's a lot of steps that say take this model, figure out where it's supposed to be on the screen, figure out which pixels are covered by this model that's there on the screen, and then use that color for these pixels. That's all a shader is. It's just a bunch of steps to figure out what color to put on every pixel on your hardware. Now, it sounds like a lot, but it's really, really simple when you dig down into it. Shaders are relatively simple code compared to, say, Andrew's complex character-defining lists with all the stats and modifiers that they have. Simple math goes in there, and you just get the color, done. As for how you figure out how to write shaders, you start by figuring out how this pipeline of how to figure out where something is works, and then what color it should be works. It's two simple methods in most cases, because everybody figured out that it can be simplified to just these two methods, which are the vertex shader and the fragment shader, or the pixel shader. It's the steps in between to those are generally simplified and always the same for most game engines, so you don't have to worry about it. As for how you start figuring out those methods, there are plenty of tutorials for every game engine. Unity has its own gigantic list for the built-in render pipeline and how to write custom shaders for it with code. Or these days, you don't even have to use code, because there's a shader graph, which is a visual tool where you just drag in, hey, put this color here. Hey, give me a function that figures out the rims of the object so I can give them a glow, or anything like that. And you just stack them up. It's a method. It's code. It's just saying color red is base, rims, turn to blue when in rims. And then you get a nice glowing thingy. As for how to find those resources, first off, check the documentation. It's always the best to start with documentation. I'm going to preach that. Secondly, shader graph is extremely simple. You can find 1-minute tutorials on YouTube. You can find 10-minute tutorials for more complex effects. Even Brackeys had some great effects on the shader graph. And lastly, there is a book I recently picked up, and I will swear by right now because it's been freaking amazing. Building quality shaders in Unity, and for Unity, sorry. And it is an amazing long book that goes over everything you need to know for both the built-in and the universal render pipeline, from understanding how matrices for figuring out where things should render work, and the logic behind how rotations work, shearing, complex effects, post-processing. It has everything. It's like 900 pages long. It's been a joy to read. I've been talking about it in Jason's story server as I've been reading through it. It's been a lot of fun. Some others picked it up as well. We were comparing notes. It's worth. So, yeah, shaders.
It looks like you're saying something, but we don't hear you right now.
That's because I muted myself like I usually do. Yeah. Yeah, this is the correct link, right? For the building quality shaders in Unity. I just dropped it in chat. I'll put it in the description too. It looks great. I was saying I'm gonna order it as soon as I stop sharing this tab.
I'm personally reading it on Kindle because there's some code there and it's like cleaner to read, on a browser where you can like dock it by the side and you're figuring out what you're reading.
Mhm.
There is one thing that I want to say regarding specifically game engines and Unity in particular, which is shaders are just code. There is no magic in there. There is no, I didn't write this, ergo it doesn't, it works magically still. That doesn't happen. What does happen is that shaders tend to have using dependencies like regular code, where you say using system, using Unity engine, etc. And those will include macros, macros being code written in advance that you can pull in and act as if it's your own code, like a copy paste of sorts. And then you can refer to that. And a lot of people don't understand that these macros do a lot for them. They simplify things a ton. So that is one of the things I struggled with personally when I started working on shaders. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I'm still terrible with shaders, so I want to grab this book and check it out. I also wanted to share. Last week we had a network connection, but a binary lunar dude was on, and they've got some really cool shaders and really cool videos in general. I've been going through watching some of his stuff lately. This AI art assets, I've replayed it a couple times now. It was really, really cool. And then he's got one on, I think a couple on shader stuff. So if you're looking for shader videos, I'd go check his out too. I'll link those down below. And then Tor, you had mentioned something in chat as well, right?
Yeah, it's just my experience of learning shaders and developing an intuition for shaders was using this website called Shader Toy. It's quite well known. And it's just so awesome. You just go in and you make a shader and you type the code, and then it happens on screen. Whatever you just typed happens on screen right away. And it's just it's so easy to learn, and there's so many examples and cool things that people have done. And typically they do some pretty crazy stuff that is like pretty far out. Like you can see there's some simple things there, and then there's some like where you're like, oh, there's 3D objects, and it's like, yeah, no, that's just a shader doing that. That 3D object is just math that somebody's writing. And they built like a whole snail out of math or whatever, and there's some crazy stuff. But the thing is, you can go in and you can just look at the code and see how it works. And for many different effects, they turn out to actually be quite simple. And often they're also very well commented. So developing an intuition for shaders in general, I've learned so many things from Shader Graph. Not typically the toy part of it, in the sense that like all of those crazy 3D things with the ray tracing and the distance fields and so on are typically not that used in games, but you can find all sorts of effects in there, and you can just go in and search for whatever you want, and then you can usually find like 50 different versions of it, and just go study the code and figure out, how do I do this then? And then you can just copy it to your own account and mess around with it and change it, and it's a great little toy website for learning how to use shaders.
Yeah, this is very cool.
It's actually a great point to go about explicitly, which is getting to see their changes instantly is fantastic. Shader Graph gives you a preview of every single node in the chain. So as you make changes, you directly see how your data transforms from being just a red circle to a red circle with a blue glow, or a red glow, or a green glow because you did something wrong, etc. Knowing when something goes off the rails is fantastic, because you can go just to that point and figure out what was wrong, fix it, and then continue, which saves a ton of time. Because if you had to go through your entire code every time something went slightly off, that would be frustrating. And Shader Toy is amazing because you can see every single one of the effects and you can modify them. You can go in and say, there was a shader the other day where it's like a person in a snowy area where they have a hood and the eyes that are moving, and I'm like, this is a shader. The eyes are drawn with code. The body is drawn with code. Lips are drawn with code. And you can go in and change it, and it makes a lot of really fun effects, and like you get to learn a lot.
It's a good point with the shader graph and the previews. I do think shaders probably is one of the best cases for like a visual code editor, basically, or it's not even really a visual code editor, right? It's just like a but it's a more conceptual way of creating something that you would write in code. I think is one of the few cases where like the visual version has an advantage over the code in some respects. I think typically it's always better to write code than to use like a visual code tool. But for shaders, the shader graph and shader graphs in general are a pretty cool tool to have.
Yeah, this is really cool. I'm just playing. I haven't actually played with this before. Now you can see. I love how it just live updates though, or in 3 seconds updates. To go modify and make my buttons big and fat and stuff. Gotta figure out. I mean, I think that going through this would definitely help me get through the code and understanding it a lot easier. I mean, this one's probably not a great example to start with, but it was a fun one to. I kind of knew what they were. The things are nicely labeled and named. I could figure out where to modify a joystick and stuff. So this is neat. I got to learn some shader stuff. I'm still terrible at it. Every year I say I'm going to learn shader stuff, and every year I get distracted and don't get around to it.
One more thing about the concept of using shader graph, it's generally speaking non-destructive data transformation. So you have a list of nodes and each of them does a small transformation, and you can build them up and you can change them on the fly. That's been emerging as something more popular in most digital applications. Blender has geometry nodes now, so you have basically geometry shaders that actually affect the 3D scene, and you can actually rasterize the model at any given point, so you can make dynamic models in Blender now. And there is Houdini, which is like a tool made specifically for procedural anything. It just takes in data, gives you nodes. The nodes can transform the data, and you can do whatever you want in there. I've been using it for animation transformation recently, where I'm pulling in an animation, I'm retargeting it to our character, I'm adding IK, I'm doing some physics stuff to make some character bones like flow in the wind, etc. And then I'm rasterizing it into a new animation for my own character, starting from an asset pack. It's really nice. You get to see every step of the way, change it. Nothing gets lost on the path. Traditionally, if you use something like Blender and you like took a cube and you moved one point to the side, you can never get that point back to the same original area unless you Control Z. And if you close the session and you open it, that Control Z is gone. But with nodes, you actually have the ability to say, move this point there. And actually, I also want to do something if I didn't move that point, or I want to move the point to a different direction, and I want all the changes that I made after I moved that point to still apply. This is what nodes are for. It's fantastic. We are barely seeing it with visual scripting in games because games are transitory in time. Every frame changes something beyond the point where you can go back. So it's really difficult for them to do things non-destructively, but it still lets you see how your information moves from one point to another when you do a visual script.
I've got nothing else to add there. I was just talking muted. All right, let's go. I think that's good. We got lots of good advice here. I'll try to get all the links for those down in the description too for people who missed them in chat. But they should all be in chat too. If you guys have anything else that pops up, let me know too. I want to make sure that we get those out there. And I'm gonna order that. I think I got it in my cart right now. I'm gonna go check out in a second. I wanted to pop up a question that I don't know the answer to, and Dave is not here, so maybe Dave will appear and randomly answer it because it's a company business question, and he really loves answering those, and he's good at answering them at least. And it says, do you have any first step advice on legally setting up a small game dev company in the U.S.? Any game dev specific concerns to be mindful of? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. Maybe not just in the U.S., but just in general, like legal stuff when setting up a game dev company. I assume it's about the same as every other type of company, but I don't really know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a first step advice, so it could apply to any company, I guess. One thing that comes to mind immediately is the recent drama with a certain game that's delayed its launch because the developers claimed they didn't properly register the game's IP, the name, as for copyright purposes or something like that. So do register the thing that you're planning to use, whether it's your company name or product name, if you have one in mind and you're really fixated on it. Make sure it's done properly.
This is like the type of talk to your legal representative and your
Yeah.
tax representative and all that stuff. I do remember years ago, at least in the US, there was a lawyer advertising themselves on the forums that was like dedicated to game developers.
Yeah, I've hired him before.
Oh,
I had him
So,
review some legal docs. It was fine. I mean, it went okay. Pricey though. I would say, depending on like your scale too, and your income and revenue, it's probably going to change. If your company is just like you and two friends, and you guys have $1,000 between you, I would probably not worry too much about a lot of this stuff yet until you start getting closer to the point where you're actually going to have some money involved. Because once you start setting up the company and setting up all the legal stuff, it does get a little bit pricey. I mean, it's not like you don't need to spend a lot of money, but it's going to cost you money to set up the company, set up the at least in the US, and start paying the taxes on it. And there's minimum taxes depending on where you are. So I would talk to somebody from your specific state, because it's going to vary from state to state, that deals with small businesses, is essentially, at least to get started. Now on game dev specific things, I don't know, but I'm sure Dave does. So come back next week and he'll probably have a good answer. As for the type of company to form too, I'm not really sure what's best. I generally see people doing either an LLC if they're really small, or an S corp or a C corp, depending on the income and revenue and all that stuff. It all depends a lot on your state. So I talked to somebody who's a pro there, or talk to 2 or 3 people. And my recommendation for finding somebody too is just ask people that live in the area who they recommend, because there are people that are good at taxes and good at helping you set up a company and stuff, and there are people that are terrible at it that are going to end up costing you just a lot more money and a lot of problems and pain. So you want to find somebody that's a good reference. Don't just go Google and grab the first thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has anything else on there. So
I'm completely
I'm
lacking.
from Denmark, so I don't know much about American corporations, I'm afraid.
come on, Tor, give us some legal advice for. Like I said, it varies a lot, and Dave is kind of the expert on that. So maybe he'll appear. You just got to say his name a couple more times and just kind of show up. Or he'll be here next week, probably. I did want to, before I continue on, remember to pop up and share the boot camp starting tomorrow. So you can register for that by clicking in the link, and I guess it pops up in chat too, or in the description. And let's scroll over to the next question. Oh, here's an Odin one I want to pop up, since I haven't had anything good for Tor. Is it possible to add a dynamic UI in the editor using Odin, like a progress bar, live updating UI? I mean, that's what we see, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it always is, right? It just draws whatever the data is, and you can have it animate however you want, really. So is it possible to add dynamic UI? Well, it already is. You just need to make it move. That's all. Like we have actually examples in our attribute overview that are animating quite a lot. I think
they're like the bars are bouncing up and down,
where it goes like back and forth. There's one with show if, where it sort of is bouncing back and forth and toggling whether something is being shown or not, and like it's all dynamic always.
There is one thing to mention, which is the Unity inspector windows don't necessarily, editor windows don't necessarily always repaint every frame, and that's one caveat that people need to learn about, where if you do want to make an animation every frame, you may have to call repaint on the specific window you're working with every frame.
Yes, that's right. Odin is pretty good at figuring out when it needs to make that happen and sort of just automating that little annoying thing away, but it's typically it'll just work with Odin. But yes, if you're not using Odin, or if you're doing something very advanced and custom, then yeah, you will need to have to remember to tell the window to repaint.
Yeah.
Here's another question that popped up. Does working with famous libraries like physics, or I guess just things that people know the name of, give an advantage in getting a job in the industry over other things, or over other people probably? I've attempted to make a small engine with Ogre, the 3D renderer, and I assume they're wondering if that helps for getting a job as well. So do you guys, when you're looking at resumes, are these like buzzwords, the keywords of like I've used Houdini or PhysX or whatever, like do those matter to you? Where do you guys rate that kind of stuff?
Personally, when I'm doing any hiring, I'm asking the people what did they actually do, because people will gravitate to using fancy words to describe something very basic. Like, I used physics when I worked on a game engine, and I'm like, okay, so you just used the sphere collider in Unity. Good job. Not in any mean way, but I have caught people who wrote very extensive, elaborate descriptions of what they did, and basically amounted to that. So if somebody actually worked with the language, that's great, except if I'm not using something that uses the language directly, I will have nothing to do with that. So if you worked on physics, but I am using Unity and you can't extend physics, you don't have access to the source of physics within Unity, there's nothing to be done with that. If you have a better understanding of how a physics engine works, and you know advanced features like how the dynamic joints work and the articulation bodies, that is something that is never talked about in Unity, and you can show me cool things that can be done with that your knowledge can bring to a table, then yeah, that would put you with an edge over the competition if I need that kind of thing or want that kind of thing in the project that you are being hired for. If you're working with a company that makes a custom engine, which gets less popular these years, then they may want you for that. But if they have their own custom physics engine, physics won't help you there if it's internal. For example, Unreal Engine recently switched from physics to their own chaos system, if I recall, is their name, for the physics engine that I have. So now that physics knowledge, despite being great, will need to have some conversion. Knowing the basics of like how a physics engine actually works has value. It's just that if you can't actually directly modify it or express that knowledge in a unique way over everybody else, then it doesn't have much value.
I'd say also, though, it would show a lot of, like, there's a difference between the fact that you've worked with physics or made your own engine, like what that implies about your ability to use physics or whatever, but also what it implies about your ability to, as a programmer, to learn new things and work with complicated things and implement your own systems and finish them. I think there's a lot of value there because those are very, very important. Generalizable skills. I think it's less important that you know how to use this or that library, and more important to demonstrate that you are good at programming and solving complex problems in general, which is the far more important skill to have as a programmer than knowing how, you know, some library works.
Yeah. And how do you guys feel about game engine knowledge? Like when you're hiring somebody, do you want to hire somebody who is already experienced with that specific engine, if possible, assuming you're not doing like an in-house one? Or does it not really matter? Or does it just like a small boost? Or how does that kind of rate for you guys?
For us, and it's not that we've done a terribly large amount of hiring. We're quite selective, really. But for us, it's more if they need to know the engine already to be like, then they're not the kind of person we would want to hire, because we would want to hire the kind of person who could just learn it quickly anyways. And those are the kinds of programmers we're looking for, where they don't need to know the engine already. And because if they do need to know the engine already and have a lot of experience in it to be productive quickly, then they're not the kind of person that we would want to hire.
And that's you're not hiring junior developers, right? You're hiring kind of like, if you were hiring, you'd be hiring top tier, really good.
Well, not really, actually.
No?
I'd say it's more about the kind of person and how good they are at learning, and sort of their attitude to work as a person and to what they do as a programmer. There's a kind of mindset that we look for, and we don't really care where we find it. It could be some intern, could be a student fresh out of school, it could be somebody experienced. It doesn't really matter as long as we find that. That's what we want. That's
fair. I can see a lot of the people that I think of when you talk like that, they were like that as teenagers too, right? Like they were kind of that hardcore and just loved the solving of problems and the finding new problems and new ways to I guess to solve them. Right? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though. It's interesting. Andrew, you got any thoughts on this one?
I mean, just not specifically. I haven't tried to get jobs like that, nor have I been in a position of hiring people in those areas. But the ability to learn is always important. The ability to create creative thought, that you're eager to solve problems, extremely important. There's, I think, very few jobs in this type of industry that are going to be the thing that they say they are. Like, hey, we are making this one thing and your job is to do this one thing. Are you an expert in that one thing? You may start out like that, but you're going to be doing lots of sorts of different things, and over time, it's going to be lots of different things, and you're going to have to learn new systems. They're going to switch from one system to another, and then you're going to have to migrate things and learn how there's just so many different things. So the ability to learn, the ability to show that you're able and curious to try new things and tackle new problems would be, in anything I'm hiring for, I want people who are eager to take on the challenges, really.
I assume you're feeling the same way though, because I see you as like that kind of person too.
Thank you. So I generally value the ability to learn and adjust a lot. That said, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit, as much as I feel just like you, Tor, about finding people with the right mindset and the ability to learn, sometimes you're in a hiring position where you need somebody who can start off quickly. And if you find even the most intelligent person ever, if you need to get something fixed or rather adjusted, developed quickly, and they don't have the time to learn from the get-go because there are a lot of internal small things that are going to take weeks to figure out, such as learning the internals of Unity's editor workflow, how serialization happens every frame, the repainting, how shader graph exists and how it relates it and compiles shaders and shader variants, etc. If they don't know anything about game development and you need the game developer for a project within 3 months, it may not be the best choice to hire for that specific purpose.
Yeah.
I will still advocate for getting smart-minded and flexible people onto a team so that they can grow into the positions that you want them in. Relogic is a small company. Everybody wears many hats. So learning to do a lot of things is really important. But we do need to see some level of guarantee that somebody can fit a position, because if you're hiring somebody to do game graphics and they don't have an ounce of passion, knowledge, or predefined ability to show a skill with it, then how do we know we're hiring for the right position? Just intelligence doesn't guarantee creative skill, for example, which is something that's needed for game design purposes, game, flair, etc. Again, this is just devil advocacy. I do think that the trait itself is immensely valuable.
Yeah,
it's situational, right? There's different cases for different things, and we're like one specific kind of company where we like to go slow and steady, and I've only ever had that experience with this company. So different places would have different priorities. I was also going to say, forgot to say that maybe you shouldn't listen to me because I've never had a job, right? I did. This is the first thing I've ever done, right? I've never had an employer, so I don't know how that side of it works, and we're just kind of winging it ourselves here. So we're not probably your typical thing. So anything I say is just what I think, and not like any industry advice, I would say. So you should probably listen to Uri more than me here.
To be fair, you're doing great, and we have been using Odin in Relogic internal projects. So.
We'll have to talk about that in a bit too. I got that. There was a question that I think would tie right into that. I just wanted to say that I think that the most important part I talked about earlier, which was really if you can focus on the skills for that specific job and for that game that you're applying for, having those on there is going to be more important than having anything else. If they're working in 2D stuff with a specific style or a specific set of tools, and those tools, or you can go learn those tools before you apply, then do that and put those right up at the top, because people are going to look at the stuff that stands out, that it actually matches kind of what they're looking for. But Andrew also kind of called out that a lot of time the job requirements are total bullshit. I think you said it in a much nicer way, but most of the times, most jobs that I've applied for, it's like the first 2 bullet points are accurate and the rest is just totally not made up nonsense. It's either aspirational stuff that maybe one day we'll do, something that somebody was curious about and wanted to learn about, or something that they used to use a long time ago, like access databases. That there's still one around and somebody might have to go look at it once every 2 years or something, but most of the stuff is just junk.
It's often the hiring manager doesn't know the stuff that the person needs to do. Like, the person who will be your boss might not actually know all the tools and systems that you're going to be making use of and taking advantage of. And there's a lot of fluff and other things in things like, you've got senior this. We want 5 years of experience in this. No, they don't. What they really want is someone who's able to do it. You got to demonstrate that. If you for folks out there, if you say, well, I'm a junior dev, so I can't apply to senior dev gigs. No, you can. You can apply. They can say no if they want, but you can apply and you should apply, because a lot of times they throw the label senior on everything and they say that they want any arbitrary number of years on everything. There's probably a job requirement out there that requires 20 plus years of Unity experience.
There have been ones that required more C# experience than C# had been around for,
exactly.
At least back in the day.
Exactly. It's like when a new whiskey company comes on the scene and introduces a 15-year whiskey, and you're like, wait, how do you have a 15-year? Yeah. So apply anyways, and because in the end, what they're really trying to do is get somebody who works well with other people, who is able to learn new things, able to adapt and accomplish the things that they want to set out, which oftentimes boils down to how can we just do things better, faster, and make more money for other people.
One thing I wanted to bring up, which correlates to what you just said, Andrew, is that Jason Story in the comments mentioned that you should advertise the stuff that you care about presenting yourself as more, and avoid presenting the traits you don't want necessarily for this job. If you're going to a game dev company and saying, I know how to cook, I can make you a cake, that doesn't do anything for a game developer. And they're saying, oh, this person is actually cooking and he's only caring about programming as a side hobby. We don't need something like that. We want somebody who's more focused on game development. So what you put on your resume / how you present yourself is going to affect how people perceive you, and therefore how aligned with you they are, and if they can pick up that you really want the job. So be mindful of that.
I think it's super important, like showing that desire and passion for the job, and like I think I mentioned it many times, writing a cover letter too, or even having ChatGPT give you a template for a cover letter if you have to do something like show that you're interested. Ideally, just write it yourself, but if you're a terrible writer, then have ChatGPT write it and fix it.
Yeah. One more thing regarding cover letters. People saying that I've seen people say that as ChatGPT can write cover letters for you, they lose their value. That's not what happens. Taking the time to make yourself a cover letter that properly expresses who you are is a step of showing goodwill and effort. And that's what's being perceived when somebody receives a cover letter from you. It's not the skill that took to say, yeah, I'm going to make a cover letter. That's the actual effort put in to saying, yes, I want this job.
And it's the effort in customizing it to that specific job and having it be about why you want that job. And that's like, I feel like it's one of the easiest, like simplest little hacks you do. Like you do that right at the beginning. It's a tiny little amount of work, has a giant impact versus going to apply for 100 more jobs because nobody's replying to you or something. Actually just put in a little bit of effort on each one of those things. People care. It makes a big difference, I think. Anyway, let's go on.
One more.
I don't want to talk about. Go ahead.
One more. Just a joke, but Andrew, how dare you not have 20 years of C# experience, work 2 jobs at the same time to double the experience per year?
Yeah, well, I can just say I've been programming for 28 years because I did start when I was 14 or 15 doing HTML illegally for my dad. So
Illegal
And I'm going to
HTML.
throw
That's
some
a new
trivia
one.
out there. Do you guys know who the first person who created the first professional sports team webpage was?
Was it Andrew?
It was Andrew. It was for the Las Vegas Bumblebees Arena Football League back in the day. Guess who the first person to make the first webpage for Wired magazine was?
Also,
14-year-old Andrew.
wow.
And I think I
Wow.
made the first Cirque du Soleil webpage too, and it had one of the first videos that you could see live on a webpage.
I don't have to get on my 14-year-old. What the hell?
Hey, you just have to pay him pretty good money. I was getting paid $20 an hour when I was 14, just because my dad and his partner couldn't afford to pay us until they got paid, so they had to like do child labor with their family. It's not child labor if it's your own kids.
Yeah, it's allowed if it's your own kids.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Moving on.
That's why I got a bunch of them. Let's jump on to this question that I think Tor and Andrew both have some thoughts on, and it says, Tor, I'd love to hear more about what it's like to sell software on the asset store. There are almost no resources out there about it. For instance, how do you handle licensing and IP and all that stuff? And you guys kind of have your own setup for that, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're probably a little atypical these days for your standard asset store publisher being in the verified partners program. But I can talk about our experience starting out, where we were just, anybody else. And I mean, it's difficult, I guess, is the only way I can say it. Really, it's my washing machine is gurgling in the background. I hope you can hear that. 1 second.
Nah,
No,
you got a good mic.
That's good. Let's see. Okay, so I mean, it's difficult because you don't typically at least the way we tried to do it was we tried to do it as our main occupation, right? It was what we did to make a living at all, and there were several of us. And I think maybe that was a mistake because even the large asset like Odin, which was quite successful for an asset on the asset store, did not make a lot of money for like 3-4 people.
There's a lot for one, and then it scales down as you divide it by 4.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if it was one person, they would have been doing pretty fine. But still, probably anybody with the skills to build Odin could get more money on like an actual job somewhere, probably for the first few years of running it. In terms of licensing and IP, it's an interesting question because I don't think that's anything we ever really thought much about. And licensing, of course, we have. IP is like, I mean, we put our copyright headers in our scripts, and then I don't know, we don't think about it much more than that, right? I don't think it's worth it doing patents or like, heaven forbid, trademarks and so on. That's a different kind of league altogether. Licensing on the asset store is quite simple in that there's an asset store, there's the license that you can sell it under. And they have done all of the work for you there, really, because you can't change it. Unless, of course, you then have permission and you can work with Unity then as part of like something like the Verified Partners program, which, and then that's where we could change our licensing, right? And we could add the same revenue cap that Unity had and launch our enterprise licensing. And so that's sort of where we made that leap beyond in cooperation with Unity. And it's harder to talk about that as because then it's like not really asset store anymore. It's much more focused on direct business to business relationships and like enterprise sales.
But the default licensing stuff, that's all just built into the asset store now, right?
Yeah,
it didn't used to be, right? You could just download and buy, and there was no.
I mean, there's no DRM or anything like that, but they handle all of the stuff for you. There's the legal licenses you can use. There's like the editor one that is per seat, and then there's the one that's not per seat, that's per project, or just ownership per legal entity, I guess. I don't actually really know how that works because we only ever use the per seat version. And that's just it. And then Unity handles the distribution of it, and they handle basically everything else. So you just hit publish, and then you mark it, and then money comes in, and you handle your reviews, right? But it's pretty simple from that perspective. It's easy to do. It's hard to succeed I guess is maybe how I would put it. It's very important that you do something that's really good, I think.
Oh, you guys definitely have done that.
If you can see the quality on it, then and the passion that's been poured into a product, I think people can tell that often. Like you can see typically the front page, it's all great stuff, right? It's all amazing things that people have built that are like quality solutions. So,
Andrew, you got any thoughts on this? You don't sell tools. Well, you kind of have tools, right?
I mean, tool, yeah. So the game modules is a tool, and the reason I started it was because there just wasn't a solution out there that did what I wanted it to do. I would have preferred. Same with the art. If somebody else was making the art that I wanted to buy for my games, I would never have started, because why do that if somebody else is doing it already? So, yeah, it's hard. I mean, everyone's different in how much, what does it mean to be successful is going to be different for Tor than it is for me, perhaps. And certainly different for somebody I'm in an expensive area. So if I was in a different part of this country, then I could probably get by on much less success, And so it's very difficult. It's not easy, I would say, but it's not hard either, in that if you're already making a thing that you know how to make and you're providing a solution to a problem that you had, there's probably other people who had that same problem. So just put it out there. Difficulty is the marketing, putting up documentation, making it clear what it does. I've seen people on the asset store in the past few years, developers, usually tool developers, who they've got, and it's understandable. You're a tool developer. You're not necessarily a marketing wizard or a customer service wizard or anything like that. But oftentimes they'll say things like, well, it's obvious what the tool does. It does blah, 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 blah. And they list off all these things that are not necessarily beginner friendly, that don't, in my mind at least, conjure up exactly what the tool does. And so you really have to show it. And that's a very challenging thing. I struggle with it. I know this is a thing, but I struggle with it constantly. Like with my own game modules, it's extremely flexible. How do I show that you can do anything with it, when every time I show a demonstration, people say, oh, that's what you do? Oh, it's a fantasy thing. No, it can be anything. So one of my big challenges now is showing many demonstrations of many different game types, so that people don't think, oh, it's only fantasy RPGs. That's what this thing does. It's very hard. It's not easy, but I think in general, if you're doing a solution that people have a problem and you've got the solution, then, if you do look at the front page of the asset store, especially the tools, what you're going to see is solutions to very common problems. And I think Odin is that type of thing where every developer can benefit from it. Now, beginner developers might not know how they benefit from it. So maybe I'd bet Tor's audience is a little, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, there's a little more experience than
you're pretty, typically. I mean, we do get some like beginners, but mostly it's people who are like more moderately experienced and begin to realize the value that it can actually provide.
They tried to serialize a dictionary, right?
Yeah, and like,
once you try to serialize a dictionary and someone says, oh, you need Odin for that. Oh, it's when you realize you have a problem that you're going to buy a solution. You're never going to buy a solution to a problem you don't know you have. And you're never going to buy a solution to a problem you think you can manage yourself. That's just, if you never go outside in the cold, you're not going to buy a snowsuit, right? That's just, it's not going to cross your mind. And so you look at the things on the front page of any of the sections in the store, they're going to be the most broad things possible. So if you're making a niche product, then you're probably going to have a smaller addressable audience size, total addressable market, because fewer people need that thing. If you're making something that's for pixel art games, then anyone making not pixel art games will not be interested in your product. So you're cutting out 95% of the population right there. But if you're making something that is very broad, that every single type of game could utilize, then you've got 95% of the population available to you. So just some
like
thoughts.
Saving and loading type stuff, the kind of stuff that you, yes. A system that you see in any game, or input systems. Those were always really big, like Rewired and
stuff is big. Camera stuff. All of that stuff that it's just like everybody can use it, or most people can use it. Great.
Yeah. There's another question. I think the answer to this is you don't, but I just wanted to pop it up. So it said, how can you find out if somebody has used their paid assets in a game and if they actually bought it? I mean, I don't know that there's any.
You can't.
There's an
At
invoice
least
verification
on
from
the asset store, you have
store.
no idea who your customer is unless they start talking to you. That's not data you have access to, right? What you can do is you can look at what we do sometimes. You can look at SteamDB, for example, and go look at the files, and you can see if your asset is something that makes it in. Like we can see sometimes the Odin DLLs will be in the game distribution, and we're like, oh, they use Odin, great. But that's not obvious for every asset whether that's the case or not, right? So for most assets, it's going to be very difficult to tell, and also you won't know if they actually bought it or not.
I don't know if they bought it, purchasing bought it, or
the subtext of the question is really what to do about pirates, and my personal preference is nothing. Ignore it. It's gonna waste your time, and you'll never ever solve it.
Pretty much.
It'll just piss you off.
Pretty much. That's our stance as well. It's like you can never stamp it down. You can like work all day, every day, like a team of people trying to take down things, and it's never going to make a difference. Yeah. So just think of it as a good trial and then good marketing, I guess. The people who really get serious, they will buy the asset typically, right? And the companies, the people with money who get serious, they will typically buy things when they get serious about something.
Generally speaking, piracy is a whack-a-mole case where no matter how much you try, another one pops up. But there is a case to be made for making the paid version, the proper version, easier to obtain, so that people won't bother going for the piracy. If there is an extremely easy, extremely visible piracy source that's like completely ruining your business, maybe it's worth considering taking steps to take it down, because you do have the authorship of your own asset. So you do have tools like, say, it appears on GitHub. There is a button to say, hey, this shouldn't be on GitHub because I own it and I didn't put it for GitHub. But if it's something that's not a big harm, it may be worth doing the cost-reward analysis to try and take it down.
Yeah, and I feel like with tools, you're at a much lower risk too. Like there's a lot lower demand and risk of piracy than with games. Like if you're on actual games, like every teenager in the world is out there searching, at least that doesn't have unlimited money, is out there searching for ways to pirate games and stuff. With tools, it's mostly developers and stuff who are not going to heavily do that and don't want to go to virus-free sites and stuff and download things because they're a lot more paranoid. So I feel like it's probably a lot less of an issue. But with games, it can certainly be a big problem. Yeah, especially single-player games.
Making updates to your product, if you're doing something on the asset store, updating your product fairly constantly is a good way of doing it. And then from the developer side, if somebody's facing a bug from an old version and you say, oh, that was fixed already, and they're like, oh, I see this when I hire artists, and I'm like, oh, we use Substance Painter. Now, Substance Painter is Adobe now, so it's constantly updated. If you're subscribed, you're going to have the latest version. So whenever I get a file in and they're like, oh, needs to be updated, this was made with an old version, I'm like, well, somebody probably pirated it. And I see that constantly.
Not necessarily for Substance Painter, because you can buy perpetual licenses, specifically on Steam. They've been selling it in like 2017. Yeah. So you can buy just the perpetual license and never update. Yeah. And then if you're working with that,
in my cases they are. But
okay. One thing I want to bring up regarding piracy and updates, I spoke about this before, but it's a fun story. So Terraria had the 1.3 update, and we just added achievements to the game, and it was a big update. There was a lot of stress. We were trying to hotfix as many bugs as we can, and there was this one bug where players who are walking on the floor would have their FPS drop to a crawl, like halt entirely. Like we're talking 1 frame per second. And it was just a small subset of players, and we never understood why that happened for over a year. And then we had somebody who was very communicative in telling us that there is this bug. And we asked them to share more details. And eventually They caved and they told us it was pirated. And they provided a piracy source. And then we looked into what it was. And because we added achievements that are tracked by Steam, and this was a pirated version, what it would do is every time an achievement updates, it would save a file to the computer every single time. And Terraria has an achievement, a marathon runner, which tracks how many steps you've taken so that you've run a full marathon. So every time the players who pirated took a step, their computer would save a file, and that would drop the FPS to a crawl. And then we knew every time somebody reported this bug, it's a pirate.
It reminds me of, wasn't there? There was a like a game dev tycoon kind of game once where they released a pirated version of the game themselves anonymously, and that game had like a thing where you after like 2 or 3 launches quite early in the game, your games would all start failing financially because people were pirating them. So you could never get far in the game because your games would be pirated, and then you would lose the game.
Yeah,
I remember seeing comments from people pirating it, complaining about that. This game sucks. I keep pirating my game.
Yeah.
But Yori, did you have more on that one?
So I just wanted to say that it's not a goal for anybody to suffer from trying to use whatever you made, right? You don't want people to suffer because they are pirating. So per se, they may have entirely legitimate reasons where they have struggles in their lives, and that's a step to make things a bit easier for them. Working in games is specifically a job about, in my own opinion, providing joy to others. So I wouldn't want somebody to suffer. But when these things happen, it's like it's out of your hands because it's not the official version. Anybody can do any change they want, and piracy does carry with it some risks. There have been stories about viruses, etc., being distributed alongside a pirated version of a popular game that just came out. It's more prolific with the AAA titles, which, it's not exactly affordable to most people, depending on localized currencies, etc. So, it's tough.
Yeah.
I think it's probably in most cases, if your stuff is getting pirated, it's in proportion to the popularity of your stuff. And most likely, if you've got a lot of people pirating it, you probably have a lot of people buying it as well. And I don't think in most cases, you're going to face a situation where because people pirated it, you're not going to make money and you're going to have to fold your shop. That's not. If it's not selling organically, it's because it's not selling organically, not because people are pirating it and they're choosing to buy pirate it instead of buying it. No, that's not. The pirates are going to pirate. That's if they didn't find it there, they weren't going to buy it. Most likely, that's just not the world.
Yeah, I think you're right on that point. Generally, I think it's a very rare case where a game is actually seriously affected. I seem to recall reading that a few very rare cases where that did happen. I think Spore, right, was notoriously pirated. Like more people pirated it than bought it. I think was some numbers somebody ran once. I just don't quote me on that. I just seem to recall hearing that. It's very, very rare. It requires very special conditions to happen. Typically.
Yeah, I've had that on a VR game once where it had more pirated users than real ones, but they were all in China and it wasn't available in China because it had blood, and you couldn't make it available on any of the stores or anything. So it ended up with.
There are a few things I want to bring up here. One thing is that the whole China games can't have blood, bones, etc. That's not quite the case. It's just it makes a lot easier to approve games with that. So a lot of developers pre-filter themselves out of these topics for Chinese releases. But there are Chinese games. There's a game called Skull, which is like a roguelike Metroidvania. Well, not Metroidvania, roguelike platformer, dungeon crawler kind of thing, which is really nice, which the protagonist is a literal skeleton, and all the enemies are of that kind as well. So it that is a thing. As for the piracy aspect of it, a lot of games in the mobile market tend to be direct clones of each other. Like we're talking literal decompile, rename, push it into the store, and there is not enough moderation going on to prevent these cases. And different countries have different licensing restrictions against making clones. For example, your licenses for your game in the US mean nothing in China. So there have been horror stories about developers having their IP yoinked and registered by somebody else and sold there. It's an absolute crapshoot when you read about it. As for how to counter this, in China, there's not much you can do about piracy of a game that's entirely offline. If they have the files, they have the culture to easily obtain pirated versions. But a lot of games have steered into the live service aspect where they manage your account and they control everything that you may have in the game, so that you literally cannot play without the live official server. And the live official server handles all the currency, so you can't pirate. That's one tool in the developer's arsenal to counter this, but it also comes with all the caveats of having to manage a live service, having to do all the networking, having to keep the game alive and healthy for players, because if the server goes down, their purchase is lost, and that's a huge cause of grief. So, hard.
It's a tough one. All right, let's go on to something a little cheerier. Somebody, or Michael actually, asked in chat when we'll be releasing the lower tier GameDev conference or GameDev Guild tickets, and I wanted to pop that up. I haven't talked about it yet because I think this week or next week you're going to actually open it up. So it's a conference coming up in May, the 1st through the 5th, online game developers. It's all just about game development and really actionable game development topics. That's the plan. Just all talks on stuff that you can use the next day. If you're interested in it, you can just go to gamedevguild.com and sign up for the emails. And there was a follow-up question too. Will you have a free access day? And the plan right now is yes. I think the first day is going to be completely free for everyone, and then we'll have an upgrade option for the other days. But yeah, so that'll be probably this week is my guess. I'm not completely sure, but the other one of the main guys helping me run the conference, who does all of the technical stuff, all of the back end stuff, and has been doing this for a very long time. He just finished up his automation conference. So now that I'll probably give him a week off to rest and then start getting on him, and we'll get this thing up and live in the next few days. I also wanted to share the boot camp real quick before I forget about it. It's starting tomorrow. If the page loads, is it going to load? Yeah, starting tomorrow. Going over all game development stuff, kind of beginner to intermediate over the next 4 weeks, about 10 lessons a week. And it's going to be pretty intense. I think it's going to be intense for me. For people who are attending and doing it, kind of be however intense you want. You can work on stuff all day long if you want, like me, or you can just put in an hour or so every now and then. But you're going to need at least probably 2 hours a week, ideally more if you can. But you can do it at your own pace or follow along at full speed with me. Either way, I'm going to stop sharing that and hit that little button and go back to our questions. So, where were we on questions? What was the next one here? This is the one I wanted to hit. So kind of a follow-up. Andrew's tools could have been created much faster if they had Odin integration. Has Odin considered a stripped attributes for the asset store creators? I think that would kind of cannibalize Odin. It wouldn't. It doesn't seem like it would be a very efficient thing to do.
We've considered it in so many different ways and shapes and forms, and it's just difficult because how do you do it without basically making Odin free is the problem, right? And we haven't really found a good answer to that doesn't just involve making Odin free, which is not really. I mean, that's something we've talked about in like sky high, like just just thinking, but wild thoughts. But I think that's what it would take really to make that to make Odin generally accessible, and that's not really on the
I
horizon.
feel like it would need Unity to buy Odin.
Or that.
Yeah.
It would be. I've thought about that too, because I've said so many times on the show I would use Odin, but I make stuff I put on the asset store, so I can't. And so I've actually never I own it. I bought it years ago, but I never actually have used it myself. I've seen the website many times and thought, oh, that looks nice. That looks nice. That looks nice. Serialization. Oh, that looks nice. But I do wonder if there's maybe a light version, if there's like, one or two kind of easy or low hanging features that would be very broadly available or helpful for other developers.
So we've thought about that as well, trying to make like a stripped down version. The problem is that the real power of Odin lies in all of the core systems that make everything work, right? And then there's this thin layer of features built on top of that. But really, the real magic is happening in the deep core, like all of the property system, basically, and how all of that happens. And the thing is that it's also integrated, and with that you can't really separate those two. And so if we take one little part of it, we'd have to like ship the whole core, then scrape off like a bit of the surface layer, if you will, which would be quite easily replaceable. And so it's challenging because we couldn't really do it right, I don't think. In a way that makes sense.
It does.
That's fair.
One thing
we would really like to. It's just hard.
I totally understand. I totally understand that because I tried to write my own editor tools before, and I have gotten into the habit of trying to do it myself just for the sake of quick iteration and reloading. So I love using Odin. It's not that I have a problem with it. The one caveat with it is it does add a bit of domain reload time, and when you use Writer and you quickly like swap in, swap out, it does get a bit difficult to work with on specific situations.
It's actually quite okay. It's not anymore, but a few months ago, I want to say within half a year, we actually made some changes to Odin that should drastically reduce the impact on loading times. We found, like, because Odin always in the profile sections of the Odin code, it never had more than like most in very large projects, like a second, right? And that's out of like a minute reloading time, right? But it turns out Odin being present would add a lot more reload time if you just measured the flat reload time with or without Odin in the project, because we were doing some multi-threaded reflection caching stuff after
And you
reloading
switched
that
cache, I guess.
slowed down other things on the main thread that Unity was doing. And so it turned out that, and then now we turned that off and we totally reworked how all of that stuff works internally in Odin. So now the actual real impact of Odin went from sometimes to our like horror, we found out it could be like 10 seconds out of 45 or something. It's now like less than half a second typically in any project, no matter what.
Okay, that's amazing, and I'm going to check it out right after we're done here. I think the last time I tried to use it was March of last year, so yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try it and report back.
If you find that it does add more than like half a second and a second at most, then please let me know and we will take a look at it, because it really shouldn't.
Yeah. Okay.
It should be like in the most cases it's like 50 milliseconds or something in a typical project these days.
That's a really good time for all the value you get out of Odin.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more from like just the assemblies exist, which means that Unity has to scan them, and there's no way of getting around existing at all. It might be 100 milliseconds now that I think about it, just because Unity does some stuff. I'm throwing numbers out here. This is what I remember, but it's low.
Yeah.
It's low.
Yeah, I fully understand. When you work with games, you try to pull in a lot of like big assets, but you sometimes don't need like 90% of each of them. Odin is one of the cases where you want 100% of it, because it's all like extremely good at saving you time by not having to deal with all the stuff that you'd have to deal with otherwise. It's just that, like, you know, when you start a new project, it's very addicting to have like a 0.1 second time between the moment you change code and the moment you click play. But I'm seeing that's getting slightly resolved recently with all the appearing solutions for hot reload. Have you considered? Have you inspected if Odin works well with that?
It works just fine with that, no problem. We haven't had any
Oh.
issues at any time with that.
So I'm going to try that together. That's going to be really fun. Yeah. So for people who don't know what hot reload is, important topic, because Jason, you already brought it up.
Yeah, it's right up here. Andrew shared it. I keep hearing all about it. I have not used it, so I'm ready to hear it.
Yeah. So traditionally speaking, when you have an application and it's running and you want to check something if it works or not, or you want to make a quick edit to it, you have to change the assembly. Now, this is a feature that existed for years. It's not something that's like not been present. When you use a breakpoint and you step over stuff and then you continue, you are also given the option to change the code and then continue running with that new iteration of the code.
Edit and continue mode.
Yeah, edit and continue is a fantastic tool that everybody should learn how to use if they're programming. It's crucial in some development environments, specifically the more iterative ones that you cannot parameterize. So, for example, in Terraria, everything is done with code. We don't have a fancy Unity editor. And when we make particle effects, we actually have to stop the application with a breakpoint, change some particles, click play, and see how the changes happen, because there's so many parameters that we haven't taken into account and we don't have an editor. Where does the particle fly? How big should it be? How long should it last? What color it should be? What kind of opacity should it have over time, etc. So those kinds of things rely on an edit and continue functionality. Hot reload is the ability to not have to stop the application as you make the code edits, and then just click the button that says, okay, I changed my code, update this version for me, please. And then the same code between one frame and the other immediately swaps to the new version. And that saves a ton of time because you don't have to stop, in Unity's case, deal with domain reload, where it's like the entire editor kind of removes everything that was old, it reloads it back again, and it also has to serialize and deserialize, as we talked to earlier. That can take a while if you have a lot of like content loaded on the editor itself. Hot reload saves you all the trouble, makes the changes extremely quick, and in most cases they are localized to just the class that you changed, as opposed to reloading everything. So it's a gigantic time saver, and recent versions of Visual Studio and the likes have a dedicated button for hot reload, so you don't have to deal with application restarts, breakpointing, etc.
This is definitely cool.
Yeah, and I may have missed like some great aspect of it. So, Tor, if you have anything to say and add,
no, basically whatever you said. I also have to take back my words because I thought you were talking about the fast assembly reloading thing they did, where they don't do the app domain. Or was that the fast play mode? I got it confused with something.
Yeah, so that was domain reload.
Yeah, the domain reload where it doesn't do the domain reloading for play mode. That was, my head just went there. I don't know why. So that was a little misunderstanding. But at the same time, we haven't heard of issues with this, and I would be surprised if Odin doesn't work with it out of the box because of how it has to work. This basically, as I understand it, these guys use Harmony or some library like that to swap out like the pointers, like that the method goes to basically in the and just swap out method implementations basically, and so you don't never actually do an assembly reload, right? Instead, it just sort of changes methods as you go and just sort of hot swaps things. So if Odin would work with that, it has to. For that to work at all, Odin has to work with it. So there would be no problem.
Okay. I'll let you know if there is a problem.
I
don't think it's going to be like a major issue unless like new fields try to get added, which is like a restriction with most of these hot reload things anyways.
Yeah. It's like the only thing I could see messing with it is if you can do things like add a member and then that somehow hot reloads. But I don't think you can do that, right? It's only the constants of methods you can swap out.
Yeah, in a lot of these solutions, it's experimental. There's currently like 2 solutions that I know for Unity, at least right now, which is one is the one Jason was looking at, and the other is an asset on the asset store that is on sale right now that I just linked because somebody in the comments reminded of it. FM Productions, thank you.
Ah, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I haven't tried either of these solutions yet. I have bought it because I want to save myself time as I'm developing. But yeah.
So does this one do the same thing then? Is that the idea?
It promises the same idea, but it seems to be doing it in a different form, because if you check the package sizes, one of them is 3.9 megabytes and the other one is half a gigabyte. So
whoa, wow. Yeah, I would. Okay. As I understand it, the way this one works is it uses Harmony to inject itself, basically, which makes everything quite simple, really, in concept at least. Harmony is a great library, by the way. We really want to use it with Odin. There's a few cases where it is.
Yeah, Harmony is just my main experience with Harmony is for modding, which is like where this really shines. You can take an assembly that's not yours and make changes to it on the fly. And it's compatible with all the other changes, the ergo mod compatibility with each other, and getting a game with 200 mods running perfectly seamlessly until you try to play one piece of content, and then it's like conflicting features everywhere.
This looks really cool. I'm checking out right now. I'm ordering. My order is going through. I just had to stop sharing, so all my random stuff didn't pop up. But I guess it's my old address didn't pop up. But yeah, I'm going to try out that fast script reload. That looks really cool. I'll try the other one too, but I wanted to try the small one first. 3 megabytes seems pretty good, or 3.9.
Yeah, they have different restrictions each. You should read the documentation to understand what it does exactly. But yeah.
How in the world does a hot reload plugin take half a gigabyte? I'm just trying to figure out.
They explained it as they made their own builder for code, something like that. I don't remember the details. It's listed in the documentation somewhere. I'm trying to find it.
But like the entire C# compiler is a few megabytes, like the whole thing and all of it, and even the entire .NET runtime is like 30 megabytes or something. Like, how do you take half a gigabyte? I'm just impressed.
You fill it up with images. You get a big UI with giant textures.
Yeah.
They're all bitmaps, and
it's like after all these days, Odin is still like 5 point something megabytes, and most of that is textures and our new icons and so on, right?
And links to Harmony library they're talking about. So you should be able to find it relatively quickly. Where is it? It's like used in almost any Unity modding solution, Webinx, etc. Now I don't remember where it is. Yeah.
All good. You find it. Oh, it looks like Tor's got it. Let's see. Let's pop that up. I'll share it in chat as soon as I figure out how to drag a tab over. There we go. Share our screen and Harmony. So this is a library that's up on GitHub. Tor, this is the one that's doing that reflection, or I guess doing that assembly modification. And you're saying it's just like modifying the assembly at runtime in memory, or?
It's not the assembly itself, but rather the code that ends up running. So it changes the IL, like, as I understand it, it changes the IL of the method and then invokes the JIT again, basically, or maybe it makes a new method and then it just sort of adds a little instruction in the beginning of the replaced method to go there now instead. Anyways, what it does is it lets you edit methods, basically. You can edit methods at runtime and just hot swap them, and it'll just all work. And you can have several different versions of Harmony all editing the same method, and it'll make that work. And it's just pure magic, and it's awesome. I love this thing. And we haven't used it really in Odin or anything, because it's a big commitment to, like, quite a big thing to add just for one little feature, but sometimes we've been tempted because sometimes we go look at the Unity reference source and we're like, oh man, we could make inventories so much faster if we could just go in and replace that one method and do this thing instead, and it would do the same thing. We'll just do it like 100 times faster, and then we could make the whole thing like, there's so many little things where you could just go fix a thing in Unity or make this thing better, or be like, oh yeah, every time a game object constructor is created, we would like you to notify us, please. And stuff like that. It's just brilliant, the things it lets you do, because then suddenly you can do whatever. Like the world is your oyster when you have the power to change Unity's own code, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like getting source access without having to recompile.
There are some times where Unity does things that makes me want to scream, because I can see some of like the Unity C# reference, or like there's an external method that shouldn't be external and something like that everybody should use, but it's marked as internal, so I can't use it. But they exposed it to one of their packages, so I can like fake myself being the package just so I can get access to the method. It's driving me insane at times. And if we had access to like Harmony or Monomod, which is another solution similar to Harmony in patching code for usage, there is so much power you can harness with these tools. It's like, why can't we have it? One thing that I want to bring up, though, that's really important before we go off the rails on this, is that when you use a tool like Harmony or Monomod or anything that patches the code, it destroys your ability to detect where things go wrong in your code as you debug it, because the code that you compiled is no longer the code that's running. It's being decorated, it's being patched, it's being swapped out. You don't know where things go, where they go. This is also something that's prevalent with Unity's source generation, kind of, for ECS, where by the act of being code generation, it means there is code that's not yours, that's been generated for code that's yours. So when you build your solution with all your files, it's actually adding some more files in and changing your own files via extension to run ECS. And when things go wrong, you have to know sometimes it may actually happen from that external code because you did something unexpected, or there is like an edge case. But source generation is tremendously different in that you can actually see the generated source and you can actually point to where things go wrong. It's still harder to debug than code that's entirely on you.
The edit and continue, though, is just, it's a huge time saver. Like even though you get a little bit confused, it's happened to me where like I edited stuff and I'm debugging it. This is back in the day, and I'd go back through and run into exactly that. I'm like, oh wait, this isn't actually doing that, and forget that I'd. But I think that the key value, at least for me, because it's probably been a bit different, was saving shitloads of time on builds. Because the games I was working on where I'd use edit and continue all the time, we had like 30-minute build process to kick up a server and start build a client and stuff. Edit and continue, turn that to basically like 10 seconds. Like I don't have to do that while I'm going through and making these changes and verifying that they work. Still have to stop, rebuild later, and re-verify everything, just make sure it's good. But huge time saver. I mean, it was probably at least doubled productivity. I know on their chart they have like this 800% or $800 savings or whatever. The savings is definitely there. The time and if you actually have a company, the money savings. I did want to take this question, though, about somebody who's trying to scale some stuff up, if you guys are up for it. Anybody got thoughts on this one? It says I'm part of a small game dev group of 6 people that's currently working on small games for game jams, etc. And they want to go further, building big games and starting a company. What advice would you give? And I mean, I think you guys probably all have better advice than me on this because you've all kind of done something somewhat similar to this. Who wants to go first? You all right?
I do have some thoughts, but it's nothing conclusive. I haven't gone this route in my life. So keep that in mind as a disclaimer. When you want to work with others, if you can work together well, and you've proven that with game jams, that's great. Do try to figure out if there is a project that you all have mutual interest in, because as you build a company, you want to be able to work together on stuff in a way that everybody is happy. Maybe there's like an incompatibility if you need to work on the project for a longer time than a game jam that's only 3 days. There is a level of commitment in maintaining a product. So figure out who wants to be responsible, who wants to join that, and who wants to take on the burden of like company management. Because if you make a company, you need a company manager. It's not like, hey, we're all developers now, nobody needs to do anything special, let's just keep developing things. If you are making a product, you need to start dealing with storefronts, you need to start providing legal information, you need to start authoring this legal information, which means you need to talk to a legal entity, consult your legal advisor, etc. So you can find somebody else for that, which is perfectly fine. Just understand that as you start making this into a commitment, it means people are taking less time out of their regular life into, being a game developer, and that's not always a path to success. There's a lot of games releasing these days. There's a lot of like risk involved, especially for smaller games that have problems standing out, especially if you've never dealt with marketing. Game jams, by their definition, are a very small market where all the things are being made in the exact 3 days that they take, and like there's nothing else there. You're not competing with everything that's been released since 2011. Hi, Terraria is here. So I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying that a lot of people don't consider it. They're thinking, we're going to make a game, it's going to be great, and they do zero marketing, and then the game is just never showing up beyond the first 8 minutes. So I did a calculation a while back. There's been like 32,000 games released on Steam, I think, or something like that, over 2022. And that meant there was like 1 game every 15 minutes. 8 games every 15 minutes. I don't remember what the calculation was. I don't have my numbers here right now, but it was about like, if you can't get your game to be seen in the 15 minutes that it is in the new tab, and it's not even the new tab on the front page of Steam, it's the new and trending, so it has to be trending as well. If it's not there then, and it's not getting all its income there, it's not going to be seen. So you need to market if you want to make a game successful, and that's not an easy task. And if you just make a game jam, that's not a direct translation for that skill. You can expand, you can find the proper supporters, legal entities, gaining the skill, whatever. You need to make sure that everybody is responsible for it, everybody's interested in it, and then you need to figure out a revenue sharing model, because if you're actually selling a product now, people are going to want money, and you need to figure out who's putting in the effort, who gets what. So yeah, figure everything out, make sure that everybody's happy with the decision if they're going through with it.
Yeah, there's costs to being official, right? And I think Story in the comments says focus on games, not studios.
Yes.
If you've got money coming in, and to pay for the legal fees, to pay for the HR fees, once you're all established as a company, you're going to have to be paying people, at least in the US, you're going to have to pay them a paycheck, which means there's additional taxes that get taken out that maybe people aren't considering right away. There's a lot of overhead that goes into it that, I think from my perspective as a very small business person in this regard, if you suddenly have all this overhead, then you also need to make more money, and that increases the chance that you'll have less runway for your business to grow. But if you're 6 of you you're all got day jobs, so you're fine with that, and you're like, well, let's just make some more casual agreement without forming a company yet or something, maybe, I don't know. It's tough though. We gotta all be friends.
Yeah, so I found the post that I was talking about regarding how many games released in Steam. I had my numbers wrong. I'm sorry. It's not as bad as I made it be. It's 11,864 games in 2022, which still comes down to 32.5 games per day, which means you still have more than a game per hour showing up, which, it's not a small amount. It's almost 3 games per hour, which means you really do have about 20 minutes to be the first game on the new section.
Yeah, and only a few hours to be on that new list at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of those are probably, the ones that were never ever going to be on those lists. So it's probably not quite so bad. But the result is that there's competition out there, and you got to start early with your marketing and all that.
Yeah,
think
and it's all, you also have to remember that's just Steam. There's games releasing in other platforms as well, and some people are going to dedicate more of their time to one specific platform. So you're not even getting all of the market just by being on Steam.
Yeah,
I think that also means it's very important to make something that's like, first of all, don't start with a big game, right? That seems like a mistake to me. They did say bigger. I'd say make the smallest unique game you could make, because if you're making something that's like all the other things, then and you need to stand out if you're a small team, because even with, like, you can't afford some huge marketing campaign or something, right? You need something that might give you a qualitative advantage, if you will, something that's innovative, or something that makes people go, oh, that looks cool when they see it. And then the trick with the marketing is just to make them see it then. But if it doesn't also then catch their interest, then that's not going to help, right?
Yeah, I think you got to make something fun and interesting, and not just a remake of something with a minor change. And I also think Story's talking about it a little bit in chat. The key part is make a fun game and worry a lot less about the company stuff and all that until it starts to become real. If you guys actually are building a game, it starts to become a fun thing that you think people are actually going to be interested in. You're going to actually have sales of, and it's not just, you guys started working on it and a month later it all fell apart and you started fighting over stuff. Then start looking into that. I feel like a lot of the time it's easy to do the company thing instead of the actual work of making the game, and it gives that same feeling of accomplishment because you like filled out some papers and you got some papers back in the mail or email and stuff. But it's most of the time just a distraction. So I would just get onto the game first and then get to that once you have that game kind of in the works, not long before, at least not for your first game. The second game you'll already be set up and good to go. You won't have to worry about it.
So in regards to what Jason Story is talking about, regarding the number one mistake he sees, where people assume the game will magically manifest when the time is right, and to test your assumption and gain audience, and then using validated learning. That's an entirely important comment here, because when you start making a product, you want to focus on the unknowns first. If you have an unknown that will break your product, if you don't know if the product is sustainable, it's better to confirm it is first than make all the investment of time and potential resources and then figure out, oh, we actually can't do that. There's a lot of reasons this can happen. But generally speaking, figure out your unknowns first. This is generally done in the prototyping and pre-production phase. You're doing the math. You're figuring out, okay, we can actually support the idea that we have. The prototype confirms the things that you don't know, not general boilerplate. Hey, look, this is an action game. That doesn't prove anything. The prototype doesn't do anything. You just made a product for fun. Make the stuff that you're not sure about, see if it can be good and useful, and if it can't, revise. That's like the entire purpose of prototypes. Make them, understand them, forget them. Well, not forget them, like remove them from the equation. And after that, you can make a vertical slice that says, okay, we have an idea. Let's make a small investment of like the meal piece. This is what we want players to get, and see what the audience for that is. Because when you're a prototype, people are not judging things seriously. You don't want to present yourself as a too serious presentation of your product, because then the lines get blurred and they don't know if they're supposed to judge it like, oh yeah, you have a cool mechanic here, but the graphics suck. If they look intentionally debuggy, then people will know, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to judge the graphics at all. Yeah, your mechanics are great. I can't wait to see how this is when it's polished. And then you can replace everything with like good quality graphics, but for a short segment, not starting to make the entire game, just a small piece of that. And then you have like a 10, 15, 30-minute demo. You can give that to people. That looks like a completed product, and they just play the prologue version 1 of it. And they can say, okay, the graphics are good, the game is fun, I get the thematic things you were going for, the mechanics work well for it, there are things you can improve here, here, and here. And if that sounds viable, then you can expand it into a full game. Understand where the steps are. You need to know how to expand without having sunk costs and mistakes and accumulating anxiety, which is the biggest thing here. With a small person starting to make an entire gigantic game that's going to take 7 years, you don't have the mental capacity for that necessarily. There's going to be a lot of struggles. There's no passive income if you just started a company. You're not selling any products on the side that's not supplementing you. There's nothing to sustain you as you start making your first big product. So making smaller products at the start is a great way to survive. I'm not talking out of experience here of my own. I'm talking about what I'm reading and understanding and what seems logical to me. So consulting advisors, financial advisors, etc.
Yeah, I agree. If you don't have funding, somebody else is paying for it. Keep it small. Even if you do, I think you should keep it small. Keep it so that you actually get it done and out. And I wanted to share this one really quickly. That you kind of like when you're talking about having a unique, interesting prototype. This was one that I remember seeing on Reddit like I don't know, a year or two ago, and now it's up on Steam as coming soon. And it was just a different gameplay style, a different kind of mechanic. Have you guys seen this game before? Last Man Sitting. Everybody who browses the Unity subreddit probably saw like the white box version of it with like the chairs going around, and your only movement is shooting a shotgun. So you shoot and you like, fly backwards in your chair in the office. I thought it was kind of hilarious, and it was like one of those where it was unique and funny enough that it got a lot of attention on Reddit and other places, and it's cool enough and different enough that I would buy it just to play it, even if I know I'm only going to play it for like 10-15 minutes probably. It seems like fun enough. So I thought this was kind of a cool example of that. I'm sure you guys probably have other ones that you think of too, but this was go ahead.
Not all good games are long games. There's that gigantic like discrepancy between the terms. There is good and there is long. Long games mean you have more content to plow through, but it's not necessarily fun content. We've had games like Watch Paint Dry. So I just want to point it out. You can make a good short experience. The problem right now with Steam is that there is a 2 hours refund, no questions asked policy, which means players who are more tight about their budget are going to judge your game more harshly and may want to seek a refund, or they may have the best time ever and choose the refund anyways because they can just use the money for other purposes. There's not much you can get around with it except trying to make your game have 2 hours worth of content. Sometimes that's difficult. There's a lot of game developer hacks that you can use to like justify playing for more than 2 hours and feeling like the time is well spent, but that's diving into what you think is moral or not, etc. So there is that, and then there is also the idea where games that seem longer have a bigger value proposition because a lot of people calculate the value by the amount of time that they are getting out of the product.
Dollars per hour.
Yeah. Usually, if you're trying to go for a long game, try to make the start as appealing as it can be. There is something that I talked about over a year ago on the GameDev show, which was the idea of a honeymoon phase, where long games will start with the best content at the start, and then it will kind of taper off and become slower and slower, but you're having a good time playing the game. By the nature of you spending time with the game, other people see you playing the game, which means they may want to inspect what it is and buy it themselves. And if you're having a good time at the start and you're saying, hey, this game is great, when they ask you, then they're more likely to buy it as well. They get into more people in the honeymoon phase pipeline, as you call it. And that leads into critical successes. Even if the game becomes extremely slow. One game I was actively mad at, and I think it's a great game, don't get me wrong, was Valheim, because as you progress in the game, the content slows to a crawl. There's like copper veins where you have to like stand there and just mine them for full minutes of your life. And then you have to go back manually carrying everything, because if you carry any ore, you can't actually use teleport gates, which has its own balance reasons, and I'm sure they had like risk reward calculated into having fun with it. It's not a playstyle for everybody, and sometimes you do feel like your time gets wasted by it, but that only happens very late into the game. And if you bring in friends, if you have multiplayer, which is its own sunk cost into development, a big one, they can keep making everything better. There is like a literal Steam award for better with friends because it's a thing that happens. So if you can make a game that has a long tail of time and it's better with friends and you can actually play together, everybody enjoying their own time, that can be a recipe for a very good game. Like most of the games that I see being critically successful are sliding into that category.
This is that cluster truck one that Story and Tor were thinking of too. This I haven't actually seen this one. This looks really cool, and it does look. I can see the prototype like in my head.
Yeah, my thoughts. I think this came from a game jam or something. My thoughts instantly went to this the moment you said about it. I was like, oh, that sounds like cluster truck. Or rather, I was trying. What was that truck game again? But then Jason mentioned, yes, cluster truck. Just look at that trailer. You want to play it just from looking at it. It's just such a fun, simple concept. So it isn't multiplayer like you mentioned.
Yeah, I actually played this, and they actually ran developer streams where, well, not developer streams, player streams, and the developers hijacked the game. They have a Twitch integration, and like in the middle of somebody playing, the developers can like stop times, trying to do reverse gravity, wonky effect, write things on the player stream. It's fantastic engagement tools, even for a single player game. If you want to engage with your community, that's an amazing tool for it, and they're a masterclass at it. It's a good game.
Nice. All right. Well, I think we should probably start wrapping it up for the week. And next week, will probably I'm not sure on the timing. It'll either be Friday or maybe Sunday again. I guess I'll ask all of you and see what you think, and we'll check with the audience as well, because I think I'm going to be here Sunday and Friday. So both will work. Any last second announcements or things anybody wants to share?
Well, not an announcement on my end, but Nintendo Direct happened. There were some happy news. You should go check it out.
Then that's Nintendo's online conference, or do they do it in person too?
It's not an in-person thing. They're like on a back green screen talking about things, showing game trailers.
Nice.
If you've never watched Nintendo Direct.
I'll have to check that out. And I got to check out the NVIDIA one too. They got their conference that's coming out, and then GDC is coming up too. So hopefully people can head to GDC, say hi. I plan to be there, so it should be a lot of fun. Oh, perfect. I'll have to hang out.
Party.
All right.
Yeah. Cheers.
Last thing I wanted to share real quick was the boot camp. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. If not, then just tap the subscribe button and thumbs up, and drop a comment anyway afterwards. And I guess we will see you next week. Is that it?
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.